afternoon, DT&I subscribers, and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a long time since I've done any major updates, but I'm working on getting back to that, and today I wanted to walk you through a little bit about how I do some basic weathering and detailing on some of my locomotives. Today I want to work on this Broadway Limited model. And what I'm going to get started on is some basic weathering of the trucks and adding a couple little details. You can see this model's pretty basic. It doesn't have a whole lot of extra details to it, especially like on the Pilot. It does have its grab irons and whatnot, but we're going to add a few little details to it and get some weathering done to it. I really like this model, especially because it has the chrome logos and whatnot on it, even the raised chrome numbers on the cab. So it's a great model. It has great controls and sounds, which I'll show you later in a run by. But first we're going to give it a little extra weathering and details so it pops a little more. This is the prototype photo I'll be working off of out of the DT&I color book. You can see some of the details I'll be adding on: the air hose pipe in front, the chain there above one of the trucks. I'll be adding a different type of spark arrestor on top of the exhaust there, the firecracker antenna on the cab, and then some of the weathering. Here's pretty much everything I'm going to be using. These testers weathering pins are pretty much everything I use to weather. If you don't have them, try them out. They're pretty awesome. I layer on the paint first in various colors, and then I feather them out with a stiff brush. I'll show you that here in a second. But I think it works really well, especially for trucks and wheels. It does work also pretty good on vents and screening for the locomotives and cars, and for heavier weathering applications. Various detail parts, you can see the chain there, which I'll paint black, the spark arresters, which actually came off another locomotive, so they're already weathered, the air hoses. I've got some graphite there for the smoke exhausts on the top of the locomotive, and then of course some CA glue. Really quick, I wanted to show off this piece that I just recently completed. This side of this car was done entirely with those weathering pins. I did try to use some of those rust decals that are available recently. I didn't like those so well. The other side has a couple of those, which you can see they're pretty dark. I didn't like those as well as I did the weathering pins, so maybe for a darker car they would work pretty good. The roof, they do work wonderfully, but not so much on the sides for a lighter car like this. But the weathering pins, they do work great. And this car, I think, did turn out really, really well. I'm not keeping this one. This one's on eBay if you're interested. Go check it out. But yeah, so that's why I really like these weathering pins, and you'll see just how good this does work on this locomotive here in just a sec. Alright, to get started, I'm going to do the trucks first. So I'm using this roof brown color. And like I said before, I'm just going to apply it really thick to the trucks. Doesn't have to be even. We'll go back over it with a brush in a moment. Just make sure you get it on all of the surface. Like that. And then we'll take a stiff brush. Medium size works. And brush it in. And then what I like to do after that is take a lighter color, and what works pretty good for like a sand color is this aged concrete. To do the highlights of the details on the trucks. And again with your brush. By the way, I always think this looks like camouflage, so if any of you do like the army figures or whatever, this probably would work really well for camouflage. And it also gets on the frames when you're doing this, so it's a good way to weather the frames while you're at it. There. And that's a pretty good rendition of what the picture looks like. So now we'll go back and do the other side. And don't forget the fuel tanks and air tanks. And unless you're really trying to get detailed with it, don't worry if you get a little everywhere else, because the sand and dirt gets everywhere on the locomotive. Just make sure you get out all the streaks. A swirling motion or even a tapping motion works really well. And sometimes a larger brush even. So it's slightly larger to get down in all the cracks. Just that alone, it's already starting to look not so brand new. And you can see I got a little bit on the battery box up front and on the handrail in the back. The next thing I want to do is these grills on the side of the locomotive. This might seem a little bit scary to some because they are so tiny, and what I'm about to do is going to be drastic, but don't worry, we're going to thin it out once it's done. And it might take a little bit of practice, but you can always undo it with these pins. That's what I like about them. Rubbing alcohol will take them right off without hurting the paint, so don't worry if you mess up. So what I'm going to use is, again, the roof brown rather than the black. That I think that would probably be a little bit too harsh, so you're gonna just take it and go over each of these vents individually, and you can see, like I said, that seems harsh, and it is. But we'll go back over it here in a minute to thin it way out. So that's what I'm going to start with. And then we're going to put a little bit of alcohol in my cup there. Take our brush and bleed that completely out. You can see how the paint gets on all the cracks and crevices so that it becomes almost like a wash. And it's a good idea to have a paper towel handy at this point too, so that you can dab up the alcohol or just let it dry, depending on how dirty that you want your locomotive to be. Okay, so I took the second color, the aged concrete, and I just did the same exact thing, but I'm taking the larger brush and I'm running it with some alcohol clear along the entire sides of the locomotive. And you can see it's getting down in all the cracks and crevices, as well as streaking up the sides. So it looks just like all that sand and grit and grime that we saw in the picture. And then the last thing I want to do is run it straight up and down vertically, because as we know, weathering when it rains runs up and down and not horizontally. And you can see the brush is catching that handrail though, so we want to kind of get rid of that line. And there. You can see how that looks. For the cab, I'm doing basically the same thing. I'm being careful to avoid the windows. Now you can see it's really streaky at this point, so what I'm doing is I'm going back with a clean brush with just alcohol in it and cleaning it up a bit. And cleaning up the chrome a bit, because I like that. I really don't want it too dirty. And then going over the roof as well. You can see the streaks around the window. That's pretty much what the prototype would be like. And that looks pretty good to me. And for the roof, something I'm trying for the first time, so you're seeing it the same as me, I don't know whether I'm gonna like it or not, but we're trying it, is this graphite stick. This came in just a art supply set. I'm using the pencil format of it, so let's give it a shot. I've already started a little bit of it. It doesn't seem to want to stick to the smoother paint, but it does come off pretty easily onto this other part. I'm not sure why that is, but it does spread out pretty easily. So I'm gonna spread some more of it onto here. Sorry for the shaking. You can see that it's really flaky. I guess this would be the equivalent of chalk. Then that looks a whole lot like exhaust to me. I like how it gets down in the cracks and crevices too. I'll probably have to dull coat this. It's a little bit shiny. One more little test here. Is this great? Or vent, whatever you want to call it. I'm sorry, it's sounding a lot like Bob Ross right now. Looks like there's glue spots from the factory. It actually looks pretty good. I don't know what this is. Anyway. I like the way that gets down in there. But I'll probably dull coat that and do something else to it beyond, because that's really dusty. Okay. On to the next step. So after a little trial and error, I decided to wipe it off of the hood, which actually resulted in a nice settling of the graphite into the seams of the long hood. And I decided to keep it on the radiator vents on the top there. I haven't done the front, but I'm going to do that as well. So verdict is I like the graphite for the vents, not so much for the exhaust. So we'll move on to the exhaust with the weathering pens here in a minute. But I'm going to go ahead and color once again. I guess maybe I need to remove that handrail, but you got the idea that I was coloring the radiator vents with this graphite pen and then brushing it in with the paintbrush, a stiff brush, not a soft brush, because it needs to settle in. If you do make a mistake, I found that wiping it off with a paper towel and alcohol is best, and it also is really handy for making it settle into the details. Like you can see there, that works really good, and it makes a nice effect. So verdict is I like it for the vents, not so much for exhaust, but it works well for details. You might want to try that for yourselves. I'm gonna remove that handrail there if I can, and do that front radiator next. Okay, I've got that removed. And again, all I was doing was coloring this in. As much as possible. And then taking the brush over it to settle it. And you can see some of the dust actually does go outside of it, which is a nice effect. Again, this is probably the same thing as shock, so it's probably not a whole lot of a new thing to a lot of you, but new to me. Sorry if it's not new to you. I like it. Whoops. Sorry about that. Again, this is pretty dusty, so I would recommend dull coating this to seal it all in. When you're done. Alright, next we'll move on to the exhaust on the top. Now the top of the Locomotive I do very similar to the trucks. However, I use a different color. I use this weathered black. Exhaust smoke from diesels are typically pretty dark. And I generally paint the entire stack black rather than orange. I found, especially on DT&I diesels, they're not very clean. Now keep in mind, I'm going back later when we start the details of this thing and putting spark arresters on this. So in addition to these stacks, it will also have those on the top of it. I'm not being too careful, no worries, because we're going to feather this out in a minute. But this is the first step, rather than having these traffic cones on the top. Get clear around the bottom. Nice, good coating. I'm not too worried about the bell either. I'll try to get down in there with a brush. And then I'm going to go clear across up here as well. Alright, and while the paint is still wet, this is important, we are going to go in, because this is pretty quick to dry, and use our swirly motion to feather and stipple this out. You can get some of your alcohol to help it out. And as it dries, you'll notice that the paint gets smoother as you're doing this effect. And I generally find that it takes a couple applications before you get this to where you want it. So as I'm getting into the final coats of this, I'm starting to use a softer brush. By the way, this is my third application. And you'll notice the middle of it is starting to not adhere as well, which is typical of these paints. I don't know why, but it happens. And what I generally do is I let it dry for a while and then go back and darken up the middle. And go over the cab roof a little bit too. With this softer brush. And you'll see it makes a nice smoky effect. I'm not much of an airbrush person. I never learned. I don't claim to be a painter. I don't claim to be a professional weathering person at all. But I find that these nice, easy techniques look nice. And I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes and then go back and darken up the middle of that so that the middle, where the exhaust is heaviest, is much more black. Alright, going back and darken up the middle so it's full of exhaust. Obviously this thing's a workhorse. And lest we forget it, the cab there. Did some weathering on the door and also on the front of the cab. So that is about it. I will of course do the other side, but that's pretty much how I weather these locomotives. This is how I do all of my locomotives. Not much else to it. Part 2 of this little series will be detailing this guy, and then it will be complete and ready for the layout. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, let me know your thoughts. Suggestions are welcome. Let me know what else you'd like to see from me in the future besides the new layout, obviously, which is coming. Not in the too distant future, I hope, but it is coming, so let me know. Thanks, guys.